Senator Case, Senator French, Senator Ide, Senator Pappas, Chairman McEwen. All present, Mr. Chairman.
I might get this right one day. We're gonna start out with Senate File 69, and we'll start out with the Department of Revenue.
Good afternoon, Mr. Chairman, members of the committee. Brenda Henson with the Wyoming Department of Revenue, and I have with me Ken Gill, the Administrator of the Property Tax Division. I apologize that I was not here for the last Senate Revenue Committee meeting. That clone machine that the legislature purchased is not working. I'm sure you all feel that as well. So this bill, Senate File 69, this was, as you know, a Revenue Committee sponsored bill from the interim. It is very similar to what was Senate File 54 that was passed. The difference, I will point out, is Senate File 54 was just for the residential improvement, just the structure. This bill brings in the associated residential land as well. As we look at this bill, it is 25% of the fair market value of the single-family residential structure. This is on page 2, and associated land up to $2 million. And then after that, the exemption is not applicable. There is a backfill on this bill. It is intended to cover 2025 property taxes and 2026, and then it's no longer available in 2027. One piece that the Department of Revenue, you'll note on the fiscal note, we do have one issue in that with the 4% cap that the legislature passed that went into effect on the residential structure for 2024. And then for 2025, a 4% cap, and this was all done within House Bill 45 last year. There was a 4% cap that's implemented current law for the associated residential land. Then we have the long-term homeowners exemption that goes into effect for 2025. And as this committee knows, we're already accepting applications in county assessors' offices across the state for that tax relief. And the one concern that I needed to bring to you today is our computer-assisted mass appraisal system currently is maxed out as to the number of percentage exemptions that they can calculate. So we can do the 4% cap on the land and the structure. We can do the long-term homeowners exemption that's in current law. But if you were to put this exemption in place, our issue is that we don't have a way to calculate net. Let me explain. We believe the intent of the legislature was that we would apply the 4% cap on the res, the 4% cap on the land. We would net those exemptions and then apply a percentage exemption in the form of a long-term homeowners. What this bill does is add another percentage exemption. Our belief is that the legislature is not intending, as this bill suggests, that we put 25% on the fair market value, that original fair market value, because what you ultimately end up doing, if the 4% cap was applicable, is you're exempting the same assessed value again. And so our system is not capable of doing that. Now, what we can do is, if it's this body's desire to say that if the long-term homeowners exemption of 50% that's in current law is applicable, then this 25% would not be available on that property. We can do that, and there are amendments that, if that is the will of the committee, I can share the amendments that have been considered in other committees on percentage exemptions, but I would want to stop right there to see if there's any confusion related to this, applying this 25% to the fair market value or applying this 25% in Senate File 69 to the fair market value, which ultimately ends up being that original assessed value. Are there any questions related to those calculations?
I think it's kind of important, and maybe we didn't capture it well, so I'll work on an amendment, but if the homeowner's taking 50%, we're not trying to give them another 25%, it's for the rest. Does that make sense?
Mr. Chairman, it's not clear in the language we see before you today, but if that is the intent, then I'd be happy to work with you on an amendment. If it pleases the committee, I would suggest an amendment that states no person shall receive an exemption under this paragraph if the person receives an exemption under Wyoming Statute 3911-105A 45 for the same tax year.
Yeah, that was our intent. Okay, good.
And with that, Mr. Chairman, I'd be happy to answer any questions.
Senator French?
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I apologize if you went over this, but when it says value of a single-family residential structure and associated improved land, what does that detail? Your yard and any shed, or just how is that calculated? Thank you.
Mr. Chairman, Senator French, this exemption is applicable to the single-family residential structure only as written, and then the associated residential land to that structure. So sheds are not included in this legislation. Any land that you may have on that property that is not associated residential land, for example, let's say that I have rangeland that's being valued as rangeland, agricultural land, this 25% would not be applicable to that. If you have barns, sheds, riding arenas, a pole barn, this exemption would not be applicable to those additional, what we familiarly think of as auxiliary type structures.
A follow-up, Mr. Chairman.
Go ahead.
I'm sorry. Yeah, I get that part, but it says the first $2 million of the fair market value of the single-family residential structure and associated improved land. So can you go over that again, the associated improved land? Yeah, it's not the other structures, but is it the house is plopped down on 5 acres or in between 2 pivots, and it's, I'm a little confused on that. Thank you.
Mr. Chairman, Senator French, so on every assessment schedule, county assessors determine the land that is associated with the residential land. And then if it's commercial land or it's agricultural land, it's separated on those assessment schedules. So there's no maximum on this piece of legislation. So any land that is residential, so if I've got a 5-acre tract and my home sits on that land, then all of that land is associated residential land on that parcel. We don't have a classification in Wyoming for other land, so it's either residential, commercial, industrial, agricultural. So for the most part, on that parcel, that you have a qualifying single-family residential structure, It would be any land on that account, that parcel, that legal description that you acquired, that is associated with the residence. I hope that's helpful.
Okay, thank you.
Senator Ide.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Just to tag on to Senator French's question, I think if I understand it right, like on rangeland, if you have a ranch house out there on rangeland, the county assessor kind of I think they limit it to like 1 acre or something like that on your residential structure. And anyway, you can follow up on that. But my question is, the fiscal note with the associated land, can you give the audience here that number with what it was before and then what it is now with the associated land? Thank you.
Mr. Chairman, Senator Ide, Mr. Gill works on those fiscal notes, so I will defer to him.
Mr. Chairman, Ken Gill, Department of Revenue, Property Tax Division. Senator Ide, if it's okay with you, Mr. Chairman. Senator Ide, the fiscal note for the 2 years is right at 285 million. Last year, Senate File 54, so that was the residential structure only. That was right at around almost 240 million.
Any other questions? Well, thank you.
Thank you.
Please stick around. Okay, do we have anyone else that wants to testify?
Mr. Chairman, Bill Winnie, Sublette County. I heard a legislator in a committee hearing on a similar topic remark that he often hears from the state words about what the state can afford when they're talking property tax relief. But nobody ever asks his constituent what they can afford to pay property tax. You have a cascade of exemptions, and I don't mean to, with the number of bills this time, I don't mean to diminish that, but you've got a couple things you need to work on. One is just plain inflation. You have people on fixed incomes and things like that, people that are dependent upon Social Security. And I would have to note that if you take the federal COLA calculation, starting in 2002 to roughly today, that has caused a doubling in federal pensions. And so that's the impact on somebody that's on a fixed income. They haven't seen that. You have to deal with that. Along with that, you have the bidding up of values of property. In his State of the State speech, the governor spoke about people moving into the state, and that's bidding up values. When I built my house and mortgaged it in 2005, the first mortgage on it was $525,000. I have now, and this is real estate, not assessed values. I've now had real estate people come to me saying it's worth 1.2 million. So you can see that kind of thing going up. And one of the things I'm concerned about is I've been around Senate District 14 this past summer, and there's some single wide and double wide properties out there where people are in mobile homes on a fixed foundation, down in Evanston, out in places like Opal and so on. And that property's gonna go up, and it's gonna come up underneath them if they're on a fixed income. And that's the problem you're trying to solve. And I don't mean to diminish how difficult it can be, but I think this is important. And further, if you look at Kemmerer itself, where they're going to build this nuclear plant, common comment at people's front doors had to do with infrastructure, water, sewer, and things like that. apparently the town has a lot of work yet to do, which will cost money, of course. And I'd like to link that, this may be a stretch in your mind, but I'd like to link that when you start talking about that nuclear plant, the nuclear operators that are gonna come in need to be secure in their housing. And that gets the reactor safety something near and dear to my heart, given my Navy career. Subject to your questions, thank you.
Questions? Thank you.
Mr. Chairman, I'm Dave Davis, and I'm the Sweetwater County Assessor, and I am here speaking on my own behalf. I'm not representing my association at all, but I felt like there were some things that hadn't been mentioned yet, and I wanted to just bring them to the attention of this committee. I've been in local government for over 30 years. I worked in the Treasurer's Office for 20-plus years, where I saw tax billing, tax collection, and tax distribution. And now I've been in the County Assessor's Office for 13 years, where I've seen the appraisal process and the assessed value that creates that tax bill. So I've seen the entire circle. I think that's not something a lot of people can say, and I'm pretty proud of that. A few years ago, the assessors were having this, we were hearing from our taxpayers on what we're trying to accomplish here, and a working group was put together. It included Senator Case, we were in Fremont County, Representative Sweeney was there, and along with that, we had the State Board of Equalization, the Department of Revenue, and a very large group of assessors who wanted to speak on behalf of their taxpayers. You guys have mentioned that you have seen, when you're knocking on doors, you're talking to people and seeing those. We see those taxpayers every year. I send out 24,000 assessment schedules, and my phone number is right on the document. So I get a lot of those phone calls. And we're dealing with those people every year on a yearly basis. When we had our working group, the first question we were asking, who are we trying to help? And the answer from that group at that time was the people that needed the help. And I'm going to pat you on the back for this one. You've done that. The refund program was in place. It was in statute. You resurrected it and you funded it. And that helped a ton of taxpayers. In Sweetwater County alone, we had 512 approved applications for a total of $367,000. The average refund was about $718. And I don't know if the timing on this program was on purpose or an accident, but the Department of Revenue has to get those checks out by the end of September. And when those checks come, that taxpayer has their tax bill already. So that check comes, they put it in the bank, and then they go pay their tax bill, either the first half or the full installment. And I've had numerous conversations with people who've done exactly that. That program is working. And again, it helps the people that need it. When we were talking about this relief program, you know, the example everybody used, our target for help is the little widow down the street who's living on Social Security. That's who we're trying to help. This program does help her, but not only did you provide the program, but you expanded it. In Sweetwater County, this program is very generous. The median household income for the calculation is just over $80,000. When you add the first tier, the 125% after that, it's just over $100,000. And the last tier, the 145%, is $116,000 for the household income. So this program is very generous, and it is helping a lot of people. There are income requirements, but there are also asset requirements. In Sweetwater County, again, it was $156,000 per adult member of the household. But it doesn't include the house. It doesn't include one motor vehicle for each adult member of the house. And it also doesn't include 401k balances. In Sweetwater County, we have a lot of industry, we have a lot of big companies. One of the big benefits is 401k plans. People are putting money away, saving for a rainy day. That balance in that account does not disqualify you from receiving the refund. That's why we have so many taxpayers that are qualifying for this. Another benefit to this program is it's funded by the legislature. So it does not reduce any services at the county level. Remember, property taxes are all local money. 2/3 goes to education, and the balance is all for services locally. The other thing the legislature has done recently, and Director Henson spoke on this, is the 4% cap. 2024, it applied to the improvement. 2025, it applies to the improvement in the land. And it was a great idea. I believe this legislation also came out of an assessors meeting where then Representative Crago and now Senator Crago attended, and he saw a presentation from one of our assessors. That's where that idea, I think, began to get a little steam. The Department of Revenue is able to track the amount above that 4%. So any of that value that's above that, they applied an average mill levy for that jurisdiction, and $19 million in revenue was exempted. Of that, 8.4 million was in Teton County. And I'm not faulting them at all. They have taxpayers that need help as well, but that 4% cap may have missed our target taxpayer. Again, the widow down the street living on Social Security. Her house probably didn't go up 4%. She has a very modest home, not a lot of square footage, it's fairly dated. She is not receiving those increases that everybody else is, you know, and in Sweetwater County, I can tell you that's for sure. Who that program did help, I have a taxpayer in North of Rock Springs who calls me every year. Every year, if her taxes go up $100, she wants to know why. Well, within her rights. But her house is $1.3 million. She received an exemption of over $100,000 in fair market value. I don't think that was who we were trying to help. We were trying to help the widow down the street. Another thing this legislature has done is provided a long-term homeowners exemption. You are now exempting property as it sits currently. If you're over 65 years old, you pay taxes in Wyoming for 25 years and you lived in the house 8 months at least currently. No one knows the effect of this. No one does. We can ballpark it, we can estimate, we can do all the estimates. The Department of Revenue will come really close. But I think it's going to be, at least in Sweetwater County, if I have the 2,000 applications I think I'm gonna have, it's gonna be at about $1.7 million removed from the tax rolls. Now, this program, again, no backfill. And you guys changed the sunset date on this particular piece of legislation, so this is now in perpetuity. And now I bring this stuff up because I was at a meeting not too long ago in Rock Springs, and we had the community college lady was there. I'm sorry, I don't remember your name. We had the Business Alliance there. We had industry people from the Trona mining area. We also had the Mining Association itself, and we had a lot of the new legislators. And Representative Heiner was kind of in charge of the meeting, and he had mentioned that Hageman's office had given him the top 5 issues of Wyoming residents currently. Property taxes have dropped to number 5. And that's because of what the legislature has done to help taxpayers. And you should credit yourself for that. This is a good move and in the right direction. But what I want to point out is you have a tool now that you've never had before. The constitutional amendment that allows you to change the residential assessment rate passed. So now that rate can be changed, and now it's across the board. Senator Case had mentioned, you know, is all these exemptions constitutional? Marty Hartzog, the chairman of the State Board of Equalization, has asked the same question. We've got all of these programs that, you know, we're trying to get an exemption for you because you're under 65, and we're trying to get an exemption for you because you're over 65, and we're trying to do all this stuff. We can get rid of all that, and we can change the assessment rate on residential property and eliminate the constitutionality issue, eliminate any challenges, and treat all of these people fair without having all of these applications out there that need to be processed. My point is, number one, you know, give yourself some credit. Your taxpayers have been helped. You know, every time I had somebody come in my office and they were complaining about their taxes, the first thing I did was hand them the refund application. And you don't know how many times, even with the numbers I gave you in Sweetwater County, they looked at it and said, I have more than that, and I make more than that. Those people have every right to complain, but I'm not sure they have right to relief. They can pay that tax bill without a dent in their lifestyle of any way, shape, or form. They can take care of it. Again, our target is the widow down the street, the lady that has to decide between medications and groceries. That's who we were trying to help, and we have. I'm not sure everybody needs this, but if you want to keep it uniform, the assessment rate is the way to go. And anything that you do pass, I would really urge you to backfill. I know we're talking about numbers and dollar amounts, but those are local services. You may very well eliminate a portion of her tax burden. Inadvertently, you may have just cut her Meals on Wheels. So please just understand the consequences of some of your actions. And I would stand for any questions. And thanks for letting me speak.
I will start out with a lot of the cities, counties, special districts are sitting on huge balances. what's the word I'm looking for? Reserves. Huge reserves.
Mr. Chairman.
There's a cemetery district in this state that's sitting on 50 million. The school districts, huge amounts of money. So as we look at this, my thought is the only way you can have huge reserves like that is over taxation. Would you agree with that? Thank you.
Mr. Chairman, I think that's a fair statement. I think that is the exception rather than the rule. I have 2 fire districts in Sweetwater County. One cannot put a board together right now, and the contract amount that they have to pay the city of Green River to provide services is $23,000. It's either 23 or 27. Anyway, but keep in mind, Sweetwater County is a mineral county. We have a lot of minerals, but the mineral extraction is not within that fire district. That fire district generates its property tax revenue from residential property. So that and we'll say $27,000 that they generate to pay for fire services, if those are all residential improvements, and if they're over 65, they get half off. If they're under 65, they get half off. And even with a partial backfill, like you've got in some of this legislation now, that fire district is gonna be in trouble. I got another fire district north of Rock Springs, same issue. They have trouble with the boards. They don't have any reserves. And I think very little or none is probably way more accurate than 50 million in a cemetery district.
And I think that's where we're headed. Right now, a lot of these bills are just to get some immediate relief out. Over the interim, we're gonna look at overhauling the entire tax system and reforming it. It has huge challenges. See, I can be nice.
Mr. Chairman, and I'll try and be nice back. I may be in the minority, but I really believe our system's not broken. It needs some help, but we have yearly assessments. So we're picking up all new structures and any new structures or any structures that are removed. We are doing statistical analysis on our values to make sure we're meeting all the standards from the State Board of Equalization, Department of Revenue, and our appraisal industry that we follow, the International Association of Assessing Officers. We're meeting all those standards. They're all worked into our rules, and our values are good. Now, they're going up. Nobody can doubt that, and no one can argue with that. But I can tell you our system is fair, our system is equitable. If you have a big house, you have a bigger tax bill. If you have a small house, you have less of a tax bill. If you're a renter, you don't have any tax bill. In my opinion, and I'll respectfully disagree, and if you want to have a conversation someday, we can sit down over a beer and really get after it, I would be more than happy to do that.
I like the beer part.
Me too.
I understand. And the reason you're seeing a myriad of these bills is it's 2 ends of a spectrum. As you put it, a little old lady who has to decide whether she's buying groceries or medicine. We also have the younger people that are having problems with the taxes, and we end up losing them out of the state. I will agree with you, and I'm putting words in your mouth. They're gonna go somewhere and it's gonna be worse. But we're trying to help everyone, and the reason we're doing these bills is so it's uniform across the board. But I do like the fact of changing the rate, so we'll take a good look at that.
Yeah, and Mr. Chairman, just one more point. Wyoming's overall tax rate, sales tax, income tax, property tax, 49th in the nation. The only place that's cheaper to live tax-wise is Alaska, just for reference. Thank you.
Senator French.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Apologies, I put mint in my mouth. I think you kind of, you mentioned it on they voted to remove residential from all other, right? And isn't on the all other assessed at 9.5%? How do we get it down to, I think you were referring to it, to save everybody taxes down to like 8, let's say. how do we, that's tied to other things, and then how do we do that?
Mr. Chairman, Senator French, you're exactly right. And you have to get the Department of Revenue's approval. Until Director Henson says you can do it, please don't, because she knows what she's doing. So there are steps that have to be filled in first. You have to go through some steps. You have to create some abstract codes. The lowest it can go right now with industrial at 11.5% is 8 point, and I'm going to say 2.5. Okay, and it's really goofy math how it works, but the Department of Revenue has actually done that calculation. And I did the math on a $400,000 house. Okay, so $400,000 house, if you take that times 9.5%, where it sits currently, that tax burden with an average mill levy, at least in Sweetwater County, is $2,736. Okay, if we change that to 8.25 on the same $400,000 house, that tax bill is now $2,376. So we have saved that, change in the assessment rate, and again, this would apply all across the board. That particular account and that residential structure with a total value of $400,000, and it doesn't matter if it's a structure and land, it's $400,000 total, would save that taxpayer $360. But again, I would encourage you to at least consider a backfill. So the tax authorities that don't have the reserves mentioned, and school districts, counties, cities, towns can all have a time to adjust for this. I mean, I think you were a county commissioner before you were in the Senate. I mean, you didn't have bucketfuls of money laying around. I mean, you had to find out how to give, you had to work to find payroll adjustments. You had to work to find road and bridge equipment, fuel, all those things that affected us as taxpayers also affects the government. So to provide those services, and again, services aren't just law enforcement, a hospital, and ambulances. It's YWCA, it's Meals on Wheels at senior centers. It's the Star Bus that gets people from one location to another who don't have transportation. There's a lot of things in there that help a lot of people who really need that help. And again, the backfill portion of all of these bills is something I really hope you guys will consider. Thank you.
Senator Case.
Mr. Chairman, thank you very much. And Mr. Davis, it's really good to see you, and I appreciate that you're appearing here as an individual and not as a member of the association, not as a Sweetwater County assessor. And we all can do that because we are citizens first and we have offices. And so I think that's kind of brave, actually, of you to do that, and I've always appreciated working with you. And I'm just wondering, as you've probably looked at this as much as anybody in the room, are you worried about constitutionality and the fact that we are not achieving any of the requirements of the Constitution in terms of, for example, 1511, Section D, all taxation shall be equal and uniform within each class of property. Okay, I see no way that with these piecemeal approaches to bills that we're even getting that under consideration. And I don't see how we are taxing things at the full value. When you qualify for one of these, I'm going to put parentheses around or quotes around exemptions, because I think there's an improper use of the exemption. But I don't see how we can say that that an exemption can undo treating like properties the same. The same house I have, same house you have. You've lived here 25 years, I haven't. You're over 65, I'm not. I don't see how we can violate the Constitution so just visibly. I don't get it. Does that trouble you? And I have a follow-up.
Mr. Chairman, yes, it does. It troubles me. I had an appeal a couple years ago with a gentleman who was actually arguing that his taxable was exempt because of a land grant patent. Really a strange argument. We ended up having to research the constitutionality, when Wyoming entered the state, does it have the ability to tax? Again, questions you don't ever ask until something like this comes up. And I have a huge problem, and for a lot of the reasons that you just said. But as an assessor, I could always rely on, I was treating you just like your neighbor. If you had two neighbors come in and they sat down together, which has happened every once in a while, I could pull both properties up and I could look at our characteristics as long as we had everything correct. And if we didn't, we fixed it. And I mean, we're just trying to get it right. But I could always say, you know, I'm valuing your house the same as I'm valuing Senator Pappas' house. I can show it to you. I can prove it. I can still do that value part, but the tax burden is no longer equitable. If Senator Pappas is over 65 and Senator French is not, he's paying twice the burden. He's paying twice for the same services they're both receiving. And I have a huge problem with that. I'm still meeting the requirements of the law, but it's not fair. It's not equitable, and I agree with you completely. I do not believe, not an attorney, of course, but I do not believe it is constitutional in any way, shape, or form.
And Mr. Chairman, a follow-up.
Go
That's
ahead.
it. Thank you, sir. And so what we tend to acknowledge that. I think we are acknowledging that last year's bill didn't quite get it because it too narrowly targeted people. So it seems to be that our job now is to come up with other bills that are narrowly targeted, that are trying to fill in the blank spots on the wall, so that in the end, in essence, we're creating a class of nobody that pays taxes by exemption. And I don't think we can create a class by exemption. And I just don't understand this piecemeal approach. Am I reading that right, Mr. Davis?
Mr. Chairman, I agree completely. And I go back to that working group that we put together. We asked, who are we trying to help? And it was the people that needed the help. Again, our target, you said little old lady, I was trying to avoid that term and say widow. The widow down the street who needs the help. That's who we were trying to help. Because again, there's one guy that comes in every year. If it went up $10, he wants to know why. And I can show it to him. It's not a problem. And again, it's his right. But every year, I show him the refund application. He has more than that, and he makes more than that. And sometimes as an assessor, I have to tell him, this isn't for you. You don't qualify. You just have to pay the bill. It's just how it works. They don't like it, but they understand it. And I can tell you, there was discussion with the long-term homeowners exemption, another one that, I have to be in support of because it helps a lot of my taxpayers. But we told every one of those people that came in, this is a 2-year program. And you get it for 2 years and then we don't know. Now it's been changed since then. But those people were grateful they got it, even if they got it for 2 years. Most of them, I don't think a majority of those are going to feel like the rug was taken out from under them. But I can tell you, I had a lot of questions of, okay, well, where's the money coming from? They understand that the property tax is what helps them receive services from the county. They understand that their senior citizen center relies on that distribution from the county commissioners. And if they don't have enough revenue, that senior citizen center that they go to frequently for social interaction and then also for lunches that are reasonably priced, and then if they're homebound for the Meals on Wheels, they understand that those could go away. And at least in Sweetwater County, we budget from the inside out. So it's essential services, law enforcement, road and bridge, county offices, county attorney, all of those. And then outside is the component units, library, the hospital, maintenance fund, museum, those kinds of things. And after that is all the human service organizations. So it's, again, YWCA, senior citizens, any sponsorships they do for local rodeos, any of those kinds of things. All of those things, big brothers, big sisters, are all on the edge. So when things get tight, revenue gets lost, those are the ones that lose. They lose first. So again, please consider the backfill options and please consider what you're doing to those people. You may help them on their tax bill, but you may hurt them somewhere else.
Well, thank you for your testimony.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Yes, ma'am.
Mr. Chairman, members of the committee, my name is Erin Taylor. I represent the Wyoming Association of Community College Trustees, and I would just like to tell you, following my citizen friend next to me wearing his hat as, not wearing his hat as an assessor, but my experience with him as an assessor, I think he did a very eloquent job of talking about all of these issues. You all have community colleges in your districts and who you represent. The trustees are concerned about these bills, yet they do recognize the call of the citizens who are asking for the help. my plea before you today is to just say, it might be time to really look at how it all fits together. And I think I heard that on the floor of the Senate a couple of days ago when you were considering another bill. You have provided relief. There are some aspects that you don't yet know what it looks like. I think it's important for you as policymakers to understand the impacts of your decisions and what that looks like. And so being an entity, or entities that do rely partially on those local mill levies, we would implore you to do that. With regard to the issue of what was mentioned earlier with special districts, you know, the colleges have reserves. I can get you all of that information. They have a limit on what that looks like. I would hope that the reason to do something like this wouldn't be because of one district or a couple. There are ways you can handle that in other statutes, and I would encourage you to look at that. As this fits together, the three areas of revenues that the colleges rely on: state aid, local mill levies, and tuition and fees. State aid isn't at a point where what used to be. If the local mill levies are constricted and there are no other levers to pull, what's left is tuition and fees on those students. And so what does that mean is that onus increases for those people that we're really trying to help and who are supporting our workforce. So, Mr. Chairman, that's all I wanted to tell you today. I think you all know the value of your colleges, but the implications of what that looks like, I am happy to get you any numbers that you might require. Thank you for the opportunity today.
Well, thank you for your testimony.
Mr. Chairman, members of the committee, my name is Ashley Harpstreet. I'm the Executive Director for Wyoming Association of Municipalities. And today I'm joined with our City Manager, Janine Jordan, from the City of Laramie to help answer some of these backfill questions. With that said, we understand we need to all share in the property tax situation, and our members too are feeling that pain from their constituents, and we are here to be a partner to solve through this. But when we look at backfill and how that impacts cities and towns and local governments, that is going to impact our general funds. So since you guys don't look at those budgets, these are the types of things when we're looking at, even in a large budget, general funds are very specific or give us a little more latitude and are usually directed to our salaries, where our enterprise funds and fees are very specific and spent on directly what they're raised for. So in cities and towns, a general fund will make up things like police and fire services, public safety communications, 911 dispatch, street maintenance and repair, parks and maintenance, repair, providing financial matches for grants for public transit, victim services, and items like that. For a city like Casper, the quantifiable value of this exemption would be a 2-year impact. And if we're looking at the 50% right now, 2.2 million, that would not have a revenue backfill, meaning a question of which services listed above that they would need to cut to make up the difference. With the exemptions that have already been provided, we have to plan for at least another $550,000 additionally in year 2, if not more. With the city of Evanston, just on this bill, they are looking at a $500,000 cut. And then if you look at a smaller town, Mountain View, they are looking at a $60,000 reduction. As far as the reserves comment, I'm taking that fully, and I will bring it back to my members and get you some information on that. But most of them have a policy in reserves. And as Senator French might know, as a former county commissioner, sometimes we have to raise revenues to buy really expensive things, why it might sit there. Now, that's not to discredit what you're saying about some of the special districts. You and I have had many a conversation on that, Mr. Chairman. But as far as our ability for revenue raising, that's getting tighter. And there are a lot of bills to construct those levers that we're ability to lever for general funds that will make up our salaries. So with that, I would lean on my colleague here for any more color she could provide on the services we'd be looking at.
Senator Case.
Mr. Chairman, I hope you might appreciate this, but I find a lot of irony in the fact that the last 2 speakers have been former directors of the Wyoming Taxpayers Association. And they're in a different place now. I just find that amazing.
Mr. Chairman, Senator Case, as a former director of Wyoming Taxpayers Association, we always connected the tax coming in to the tax services provided, as long as it remained transparent, which I am working on my membership with.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I can bring a little color in terms of the experience of Laramie, your third largest city.
Can you introduce yourself?
Absolutely, thank you. Janine Jordan, I'm the city manager in Laramie. To look at our general fund and understand where the revenue comes from to support the services that you just heard described by the director, bear in mind that for my community, 77% of the revenue that supports our general fund comes from intergovernmental sources, direct distribution, property tax, sales tax, et cetera. My local city council really only controls or sets fees to support about 18% of the general fund. So I hope that demonstrates a little bit of how extremely reliant on state appropriations cities and towns are and can be, depending on the robustness of their local tax environment. I would also share, I know that as legislators, you receive from the Department of Audit the report annually that talks about the cost of government. And I suspect that that informs your opinions around reserves and maybe excessive reserves. I heard the talk about the cemetery district. I wanted to give you a little picture of Laramie. As you look at that Department of Audit report, you would see, for instance, in this fiscal year, we have appropriated in the budget resolution the council adopted in June, $97 million in appropriations. But of that, 39 million or 40% is our general fund. By contrast, 45% of that 97 million is business funds or enterprise funds. And that will be reported there. There will be reserves built up across both general fund and our enterprise funds. And just to differentiate what those are things like water and sewer and solid waste, the same things that you would experience if you lived in a rural part of the state, as I did growing up in rural Natrona County. We had a road district. We had a water district. So those business or enterprise type funds are restricted, and as the director has said, do require a buildup of reserves in order to fund, I like how you say it, Ashley, very expensive things. The general fund also has some very expensive things, but does tend to be more personnel heavy because it is human capital intensive. It is your city and county employees providing services to other humans that they are there to serve. But there are a need for reserves to be built up in general fund as well. And the good example is streets. So just to give you a quick example from my community, we're seeing the cost for 1 mile of street construction right now approaching $1.5 million after the inflationary environment we've seen the last few years. We have 180 miles of street to maintain in the City of Laramie street system, and we need to be replacing or rehabilitating 10 to 15 miles per year at a cost of $1 to $1.5 million per mile. So you can see why when you look at those reports, you may see that there is a significant reserve built, but it's not an unrestricted reserve. It is in fact a restricted reserve that demonstrates good financial planning and fiduciary responsibility by your local elected officials to build up that reserve, to be able to fund, say, a 5 to 10 year capital improvement plan to rehabilitate street systems. The other thing I would mention is there are some communities who do have reserve, and they have built those up to invest them. And there's a discussion about that going on at the state level over the last few years. Some communities that have sufficient reserves to invest are doing that really under the same paradigm of fiscal responsibility that I think the state has through vehicles like the Permanent Mineral Trust Fund, trying to create self-sufficiency and stability for the long term. Because what cities experience is this ebb and flow of revenue, very similar to the boom and bust cycles that the state experiences, and then we share in. So there are some communities who've tried to be more resilient in the long term and stabilize their revenue by investing what surplus they have for future generations. But I really will say those are the exception. They are not the rule in my experience. And I'm now in my 22nd year of service in local government in the state of Wyoming and 15 years as city manager in Laramie. So I can say I think I have a pretty good feel for what our cities are experiencing. Thank you.
Senator French.
This is just a comment, if I may, Mr. Chairman.
You may.
On these, like, cemetery district, hospital district, whatever it is, fire district, whatever, they have elected boards, like a fire district has an elected board, and many of them are at 3 mills. And if they have excessive reserves, the people in that district can go to their meetings and insist that those reserves are too high and that they be reduced. And how do you do that? You'd reduce the mills. You ask them to maybe, instead of 3 mills, go down to 2 mills, something like that. If they feel they're being overtaxed and the reserves in whatever district is too much, they can go to that board and ask for that. Thank you.
Well, thank you for your testimony. No? Yeah.
Hi there. My name is Micah Richardson. I'm with the Wyoming Women's Foundation, and our mission is economic self-sufficiency for women and opportunities for girls. And I am here to just share a little bit about how we view this impacting women and girls across the state. So as some other folks have said, we also want to make sure that the widow down the street is taken care of, but we also want to make sure that she has access to her senior center, because that is vitally important to our aging community as well. We want to keep families here too, but we also know that young moms and women attending community college who are gaining the skills to use that will go back to their community need the resources from these property taxes that impact community colleges. We feel this property tax cuts too far into our schools, community colleges, and senior services, among other things. We really appreciate the work that you're doing to think about each of us, right? And these taxes are hard, but we feel like the refund program that you implemented a while back has been really beneficial, and so appreciate that. But again, just feel like some of these are going too far into those services that so many of us are really appreciative and rely on in our communities. Thank you.
Well, thank you for your testimony. Representative Storer.
Thank you, Chairman McCune. It's good to be here with the Senate Revenue Committee.
It's good to have you.
Thank you, sir. I just thought I'd provide a few comments, both on this bill and the bill that House Revenue just passed out, and on SS 54 from last year that this bill models, if I could. I actually do think this bill is preferable to House Bill 169 because it provides a smaller percentage reduction on a higher value property, and that is somewhat more equitable than the 50% on $1 million value that HB 169 does. Think about the fact that the constituents who's seen the highest property value increases over the last few years are located for the most part in Teton and Lincoln County, but not entirely. But we're looking at, homes that are really middle-class homes, but now valued at over $2 million. And those values have gone up the highest percentages. So when we were working on SF 54 last year, that bill started out as a flat dollar amount exemption on each residence, and then was limiting the dollar amount that could be exempted. And I argued that that wasn't particularly equitable to the constituents in the northwest part of the state who have seen these high values. Instead, we ended up going with the percentage number and capping it not by a dollar amount, but by the value it would apply to. And in this case, both SF 69 and HB 169 do that. But I'm also here to tell you that I do not think that is constitutional. It's clear that it's treating properties that are in the same class differently. So you end up reducing one property by, X% and another property by something else. We do have, since Amendment A did pass, it gives us a much better tool for us to work on to provide a reduction across the board. And I do think at this point in time, that makes much more sense to go in that direction. So I just wanted to give you my thoughts on that, having been involved in crafting these bills. Thank you. Stand for any questions.
Well, thank you, Representative Storr. Mr. Moline.
Excuse me, Mr. Chairman, Brett Moline, Wyoming Farm Bureau. Senator Case bringing up the constitutional issues. This is something that my members have, we're always in favor of reducing taxes. We also have policy firmly supporting that we have to go by the U.S. and Wyoming Constitution. To be honest, I'm a little surprised that this question hasn't been answered, and I don't know why it hasn't, but part of the decision that you folks have to make is who are you trying to help? If you're trying to hit the younger people, the extremes of the age of the population, perhaps $2 million is too high. Perhaps if you put that down to $1 million, that would lower the fiscal impact on it, but you would be, depending on if you're trying to help everybody or if you're targeting whatever bracket you're trying to target. But I do appreciate that, even lowering the dollar amount, if you went from 2 million to 1 million, everybody would get some help. And there's a lot of people that are just right in that, whatever ceiling or floor, or however you want to call it, that you put in there is going to people just be on the other side. But the way I view this bill, this gives everybody some help. And with that, sitting in support of it, I would take any questions you or the committee may have.
Senator Case.
Mr. Chairman, thank you, and thank you, Mr. Moline, for thinking about this issue. I think we're under a falsehood, just to answer your question. We're believing the rhetoric that we are creating exemptions, and it's perfectly acceptable for us to do that. We're not creating an exemption. We are setting general tax policy, and we are affecting the valuation of properties, and that I'm confident will be litigated. And it's a matter of who's going to bring the litigation and at what time is ripe and when they have the standing. I do think a taxing district could probably have the best chance to preemptively litigate it. I think a homeowner kind of has to wait till he gets the tax bills. So if we're going to head it off, it has to be a preemptive kind of thing. That's my opinion, and you referenced something that I'd said. So that's why I think we're not addressing this issue.
Mr. Chairman, if I may, Senator Case, the way I look at this is the word exemption is used. We're not dealing with valuation in this bill. We're affecting an exemption. So perhaps splitting hairs with you, Senator, but.
Mr. Chairman, may I respond?
Senator Case.
I would refer you to Jane Mockler's letter to the governor from the State Board of Equalization, who very clearly laid out this issue, that we can't do indirectly what we cannot do directly. We cannot create another class of property, but we cannot do it indirectly by these exemptions we're creating. So I'm happy to share that letter with you or anybody. I think it's pretty widely available, but it just nails it right there. So I'll send it to you.
Please. Mr. Chairman, thank you, Senator Case. I would appreciate that.
You bet.
Well, thank you, Mr. Moline.
Thank you.
Good morning, Chairman. I'm Gail Simmons. I'm speaking as a long-term resident, fourth generation in Sheridan County, and a homeowner. The underlying cause of the pain that's being felt was the increase in property value over a limited number of years. That is what has created this sense of pain that is throughout the state. This did not affect all 23 counties equally. And the average for this state over a period of about 3 years, the average was 25%, which is I think where maybe the 25% came from on this. However, average is a poor basis for looking at the impact. It would be better off median because average is disproportionately affected by the huge increases and large dollar values in very wealthy areas like Teton County and portions of Sheridan County. During this time, my house, my property tax increased from $1,883 in 2018 to $3,343 in 2023. So I had a large increase. On the other hand, I see this as my paying forward for the education I received, that my siblings received, that my parents, my grandparents, my nieces, nephews, aunts, uncles, cousins, an education that is paid very small amount, but a significant portion of my putting money in for the benefit of the state. So I'm paying that forward, and those are the services that I am giving by this amount that I'm paying. Because I live in the county, it also covers the county services that I receive, such as road and bridge maintenance, which allows me to get into town. It covers my fire district, my conservation district, and my community college. Property taxes is the one place where we as citizens actually have skin in the game more than anywhere else on the things that affect us every single day. So I caution any actions that are taking to decrease this. I also note the backfill from state funds. Those funds mostly come from extractive industries, and none of it comes from homeowners paying property taxes. This, as has been pointed out, is a redistribution of wealth. It's using money that came from one person to give relief to monies that would come from another. And I'll remind you of Margaret Thatcher saying the problem with socialism is that eventually you run out of other people's money. So if we build a structure that is based on backfills from either the general fund or from savings, we will eventually run out of money. So we do not yet have the actual cost of the property relief from the 2024 bills because they only went into effect this month. A change of this magnitude appears to be premature and overly broad rather than targeted. And I'm not saying that we don't need some additional relief. I'm saying we may be getting ahead of our skis. The so-called windfall to schools and local governments, I think, is an inaccurate description of what happened with those revenues that came in. I reiterate about having reserves to pay for major purchases. And finally, if you feel this is necessary, my recommendation is to decrease both the percentage and the amount of and from $2 million, maybe down even as far as 500,000, but better yet, I believe the change in the rate is what is most appropriate. It gives the relief on a now constitutionally agreed upon that the voters, all the voters, the 95% that showed up for the general actually approved. So I stand for questions. Great.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Do we have anybody else? I guess we will close public comment and work the bill.
Is anybody online?
What's your pleasure?
That amendment for the bill?
We gotta move the bill first.
Okay, move the bill.
Mr.
Chairman, I'll move the bill.
It's been moved by Senator French and seconded by Senator Ide. Okay. Kind of want everybody's opinion if we took it down from 2 million to 1 million.
Definitely makes it better.
I'm not a fan.
Okay. Well, we'll leave it where it's at then. Go ahead, Senator Ide.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I'll probably be the bad guy in the room today.
I'm feeling like it.
I'm against property tax. I think it's the most immoral tax there is out there. I mean, I'm in favor of more of a consumption tax. If we could ever get to that destination. You know, all of this inflation that we're seeing with these home values, you know, like Mr. Winnie said, you know, we do have supply and demand coming into the mix, but it's primarily, you know, a government policy. The definition of inflation is the money supply. And that's what's driving up, you know, grocery store goods and sporting goods and housing prices across the landscape. I saw some CBO numbers the other day that these are government numbers saying, you know, we're on trajectory with nothing changing. Obviously, I'm in favor of this new administration. I hope it helps with their DOGE team. But $24 trillion in the next 10 years. So inflation isn't going away. I mean, it's here to stay. We got the interest on our debt, our national debt right now is as much as our defense budget. Not to get into the, you know, fiscal policy in here, but, you know, we've got to do something different here. I'm in favor of you know, eventually getting rid of property taxes. And I've brought an amendment today, just so everybody knows. This bill, Senate File 69, my amendment, it looks complicated on paper, but it's to eliminate the sunset date, and it's also amended to amend the backfill. Those are the two amendments I'm making to this bill today. So without, you know, without getting too much on a soapbox here with this amendment, you know, the state has got a lot of money to spend on a lot of boondoggle projects, whether it's a venture capital at the Wyoming Business Council. You know, we need to start paying down property taxes and getting away from that for the citizens of this state. So I'll leave it at that. And thank you, Mr. Chairman.
You want to move the amendment?
So moved.
We have a second?
Second.
And moved by Senator Ide, seconded by Senator French. Discussion.
Mr. Chairman, could we divide the amendment so we deal with the sunset date separately from the backfill issue? I think it's divisible, and I don't care which order, two separate topics, if that's okay with the sponsor.
I'd rather not.
So I think you have to divide it if it's divisible. Yeah, I mean, we don't have a choice on that. I was trying to be nice. Okay.
Do we need to ask Ms. Henson if that's okay, since I work for her now? Just fun. How would you suggest we divide it?
Okay, I've got to track it in, but I think it's page 5, line 7. Well, let's see here, page 5. Donna, can you maybe help me? But
It kind of bounces around a little bit.
it isn't all in one place.
Right, exactly.
There's the ones on page 4, lines 11 and 12. I don't even see that in your motion, but on page 4, it says the exemption under this paragraph shall not apply for tax year 2027 and thereafter.
Mr. Chairman?
Yeah, that's, would be pages
Senator
3 and 4.
Pappas.
That's line 10 on the amendment, right?
Might I suggest we just divide it by the two concepts and let LSO draft the amendment?
Great idea.
Thank you.
Yeah, great idea.
Actually love that idea.
Yeah.
Okay, so I guess we'll vote on the first concept.
Does there need to be a second?
I think not for a division.
No.
But you can speak, they're treated now as separate things. You can treat them, we don't have restrictions on speech, but you don't have to remove them and get re-seconded. It's just divided. But I'll just speak to the sunset. I'd love to support a sunset on a tax bill like this, absolutely. And he wants to get rid of it, so I would vote no to that portion of the amendment.
Mr. Chairman,
Senator Pappas.
I also agree with that sentiment. I think it's really inappropriate to not have a sunset date, since we don't really know what's gonna happen. We don't know what's gonna happen with any of these bills. And frankly, I think it's a bit premature to get rid of it completely. So I'm opposed to that as well.
Any more discussion? All those in favor of pulling the sunset off, say aye. Those opposed, nay. And we'll,
You got a pause in there.
Mr. Chairman, just, would you clarify that again? So how are we going, so Senator Case's proposal to leave the sunset in, is that what I understand, what you're saying? Yeah.
Yes, Mr. Chairman, and so I will vote no on that portion of the amendment, but those that are supporting it should vote aye.
Gotcha. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
no problem. Senator French?
If we're voting, I vote aye.
No more comments?
Aye.
Aye.
No. No. So it looks like it stays in. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
And the next issue we'll deal with,
This would be the backfill,
the backfill.
and I would support removing the backfill. I think if we're gonna create a crisis, let's create a crisis.
I'm an aye.
Mr. Chairman, before we vote, I just want to make my thoughts clear. I do not support removing the backfill. I think it's behooves us to leave the backfill in to make the local entities that are needing the revenue. I don't think it's the state's ability to, I mean, we're taking away the tax through the exemptions. So I think we need to pony up as a state to make the cities and counties and local and districts whole again. So I'm opposed to removing the backfill.
And Mr. Chairman, may I respond?
Yes.
Mr. Chairman, I would support removing the backfill because there's sort of some ethics involved in here as well. The people that are paying for the backfill are not the same people that are enjoying the services and assess the taxes and vote for those services and vote for the people that monitor those services. So it disconnects the responsibility of local people for their local services from that and just says state backfill. And I think that creates incentives that are just bad in the long run. I think it would make it painless for these local districts. And maybe, but I think these local districts should sue over this because this is a bad idea. And if we backfill it, why would anybody decide they need to really do something structurally about it? So I support removing the backfill.
Senator Ide.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I concur with my good colleague here on the right. I think one of the speakers, she didn't like the bill anyway, but it is a redistribution of wealth. You're just shifting the burden to somebody else and just kind of moving the goalposts around and not really affecting, the government efficiency and keeping limited government. If they just get taken care of, you're enabling them effectively with other people's money. So I'm for leaving that in. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Are we ready to vote? All those? What's that? All those in favor of removing the back bills, say aye. Aye. Opposed? No. That amendment passes also. We're back to the bill.
So, Mr. Chairman, may I just clarify the amendments?
Yes, ma'am.
So the first amendment, we passed an amendment to delete the sunset date.
That is correct.
Second amendment, we passed an amendment to delete the backfill.
That is correct.
Thank you.
By way of mechanics, how we did that without really doing it is we took this amendment and we divided out those relevant portions, but we did it conceptually. But, so LSO will have to figure that out. But they both passed. So in effect, the whole amendment passed in 2 steps.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Senator Case, so when those go, you've been around here a lot longer than I have, when these standing committee amendments go to the floor, will it come as one amendment or since it was divided as 2?
It will come all together again. Even if we were to pass other separate amendments, it would show up on the floor as one standing committee amendment. Be forewarned, it could be divided again on the floor, but it will appear, it's gonna look a lot like this. Yeah.
LSO did write it,
Yeah.
so I'm thinking it's gonna look just like that. Okay, we're on the bill. Comments?
No question.
Roll call, please.
This is a roll call vote on Senate File 69 as amended, homeowner property tax exemption. Senator Case?
No.
Senator French?
Aye.
Senator Ide?
Aye.
Senator Pappas?
No.
Chairman McEwen?
Aye.
We have 3 aye, 2 no, Mr. Chairman.
Okay. Let's move on to Senate File 58. Senator Olson.
What time are we supposed to be back?
2.
At 2.
Hello, Mr. Chairman. Hopefully I bring you a slightly easier bill to deal with, but we'll see. You never know. You might think they're easy and they can quickly run away from you. So I have, what I bring to you is Senate File 58. This is the elimination of sales tax on firearms and ammunition. There are really 2 reasons why I think this bill is important and why I've decided to bring it this session. The first is that owning a firearm for whether it's for self-defense or hunting or sport, whatever it may be, it's a fundamental right that we enjoy as part of the United States Constitution and as part of the Wyoming Constitution, Article 1, Section 24. As such, firearms and ammunition should be as affordable as possible to the average Wyomingite. So that's number 1 reason why I think it's important. Number 2 is that taxes, and you had this big discussion about taxes, property taxes just now, but as you know, taxes can be a facilitator for public policy. So in other words, whatever our tax is, or in this case, what our tax is not, shows our values as a state to our citizens and to the rest of the world. So I believe that Wyoming should hold itself out as the most Second Amendment friendly state as possible. And the way that it can do that is by eliminating the sales tax on firearms and ammunitions. I'll walk you through the bill. It's really a very simple bill. Page 1, Section 1 dives into Title 39, which is taxation and revenue. And if you go over to page 2, you can see that what it does is it sets up an exemption as an economic incentive for the following, and then it has ammunition and firearm as defined in Title 6, which is crimes and offenses. We don't touch the definition of ammunition in this bill. In Title 6, it's defined as any projectile expelled by action of an explosive from a firearm. It does not include a projectile designed to pierce armor. I don't know why the statute is written that way, but it is. The point is, in this statute, we don't touch it. And then as for firearm, we do not touch that definition. We pull it straight from Title 6. It is any weapon which will or is designed to expel a projectile by the action of an explosion. It does not include rockets, grenade launchers, etc. So that is the definition of a firearm. This bill would be effective July 1st, 2025. Just a few more notes, Mr. Chairman. First is just so we understand the realm of taxation around firearms. Right now, it's based in Wyoming, it's just simply the sales tax of 4% plus whatever locals might bring. The average sales tax in Wyoming is 5.44% on firearms. And then there is a federal tax. There's an excise tax of 10% on pistols and revolvers and 11% on other firearms and ammunition. Obviously, we're not touching the federal tax, but we're trying to alleviate the burden of purchasing a firearm or ammunition as much as possible. Something significant is that no state has eliminated sales tax on its firearms and ammunition, so Wyoming will be the first state to do that. I think that's really important, whether you're talking about individuals relocating to the state of Wyoming or manufacturers possibly of guns and ammo. These are the things that they do in fact look at. And we would be sending ourselves in a direction opposite of states like California, Colorado, and Massachusetts, which have implemented special excise taxes on firearms and ammunitions. Again, getting back to that whole idea that what our taxation policy is really shows our values as a state. There are a few states, Mr. Chairman, that have implemented tax holidays where they might have a weekend or a week where there is no tax on firearms and ammunitions. Of course, this bill would be a permanent exemption with no sunset date. And that's the bill, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you. Any public comment?
Not allowed.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. So there's no state excise tax. It's just the sales tax, is that correct?
Correct. Mr. Chairman, Senator Pappas, there is no excise tax in Wyoming.
Senator Wright.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Senator Olson, the question I have, we kind of had a little side chat the other day, and the bill doesn't have a fiscal note. And I presume, just thinking about it, I haven't confirmed that, and maybe the Department of Revenue can help us out here. Effectively, they probably can't track it because it's sold as general merchandise at the sporting goods stores or wherever they are. So does this jeopardize, I know we have another bill in the queue over in the House where, they're prohibiting credit card companies from separating out ammunition and firearms. So, they can't close their bank accounts or whatever if there's a bank that doesn't like what people buy or firearms dealers sell. So does this jeopardize anything related to that if we get rid of sales tax on this, and then is it trackable for somebody or more easily trackable? Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Mr. Chairman, Senator Ide, so to the first part of your question in the fiscal note, you're correct, there is no fiscal note, and you could ask DOR more specifically to weigh in, but my understanding is exactly what you voiced, that the sales tax is aggregated based on the sales of that shop. So whatever they sell which could include candy bars or whatever it might be, I suppose. Everything is aggregated into a pool and then the sales tax is remitted. So there's no current, so to answer your second question, I think right now, there's no way to track that because it is an aggregate. And I think with this bill, I don't think it changes that. I don't think it makes it, and I can't think of how it would make it easier to track the sale because you're not gonna log it at all with the federal, or I'm sorry, with the state government. You're not gonna log that sale at all. So if anything, I think it complements that legislation that you're talking about and making it, taking us one step even further away from tracking firearms with state sales.
Senator Case?
Well, Mr. Chairman, I guess that, right now, they don't report how many firearms are sold or the dollar value of firearms sold or the dollar value of ammunition sold to the state of Wyoming. Under this bill, in essence, they'd have to separate those sales out from their other sales. You know, I'm wondering if that's really a good idea. The secondly is, I do point out, and it's been mentioned and driven home, we're not like California where we got a 50% tax on firearms. In addition, this pays the same thing as firearm or on a hunting knife or on a tent or on a part for your car, or, you know, this is the same level of funding and it funds local government, right? It's not differential in any way. Would that be correct?
Mr. Chairman, Senator Case, to the first part of your statement, which I will accept as a question.
Yeah.
It would still be aggregated. So if you sold 100 firearms, you might separate those out from your other sales, and the state would know that you sold 100 firearms, but I don't think you would submit to the state the individual name of each purchaser of the 100 firearms. And that, I think, is more of the concern that Senator Ide has, is that you would be reporting the individual as opposed to, I sold 100 firearms. I don't know if that's necessarily a bad thing. I don't know that it's a good thing, but if it means that you don't have to pay a sales tax on your firearms, maybe that's part of the trade, I suppose. But I don't think your individual personally identified information would have to be transmitted in order to eliminate the sales tax.
And I didn't mean to suggest that, Mr. Chairman.
Okay.
I don't think so either.
Okay. And as to your second question, again, it goes back to what are our values? Yes, we don't have a tax anywhere near what the state of California does on firearms, but we value the Second Amendment in the state of Wyoming. We value it so much that it's enshrined in our Constitution, of course. And I think that we ought to project that to the world by letting them know that we're not going to tax firearms. I think the other benefit to that is I do think manufacturers of guns and ammo, I think this is something that they would look at when they're contemplating relocating to another state. I think this is something that individuals might even contemplate when relocating to another state. So I think it has ancillary benefits as well, Mr. Chairman.
I just want to throw a thought out there. I'm pretty familiar with point of sale systems.
Yeah, me too.
And what's most likely going to happen is it will just be put into the computer as tax exempt. It won't be a separate item. And like in a grocery store, health and beauty items are taxed. Toilet paper is taxed. Food is not. And it's how we entered into the system. And we get that number of what's not taxed, and we subtract that off our net sales, and that gives us a taxable figure. And so I don't think this opens anybody up to being tracked, especially if the firearm store sells candy bars. Okay. Any more comments?
Mr. Chairman,
Senator Pappas?
just one point, that's not with the substance of the bill, but just with the actual drafting of it, under 3916-105, A Romanet 8, you've got your paragraph starting as M. There is no L. in statute, at least not in my copy, so there might be a drafting error there we might want to fix.
Mr. Chairman, Senator Pappas, please don't throw my bill out for,
No.
for that reason, but I will get with LSO and make sure that that is.
And maybe the department could tell me I'm wrong. I probably am wrong, but I'm just looking at the statute.
I'll look into it.
Any more questions for the sponsor? Thank you, Senator Olson. Does department want to speak on this? Anybody else?
I was hoping to ask the department. Can we get them up there?
We can.
Mr. Chairman, members of the committee, Brett Fanning. I'm the Excise Tax Administrator here at the Wyoming Department of Revenue. So Mr. Chairman, I think all the points have been discussed thoroughly that we are going to outline as far as reporting kind of the total gross sales and then how the deductions are outlined as well. So taxable sales are going to include in a general sporting goods store, they're going to include clothing, and they're going to include shoes, and they're going to include hiking accessories, all etc. Then if this bill were to pass, total deductions that would get reported to us would be guns, ammunition, candy bars, and other non-taxable items, just as Senator McEwen outlined with the point of sale system.
Senator Case.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Hey, I'm not an expert on sporting goods stores, but right now, what's exempt that a sporting goods store sells? I mean, like the backpacker food, is that exempt or not exempt because it's kind of prepared? I'm curious.
Mr. Chairman, Senator Case, outstanding question. It is. The food is exempt. It is considered food for domestic home consumption. Generally, if it's sold in a package, in the most general sense, it is going to be exempt. In my experiences with the Department of Audit and auditing kind of sporting goods stores, they could also have non-taxable gift cards that they report as well. The taxes generally when they consume the item or make that transaction. Retail stores are generally going to be one of our biggest tax collectors right now because most of what they sell is taxable. Exempt, it's going to be food, it's going to be gift cards, and some other miscellaneous items that I cannot think of right now.
And I think I can add a little bit of clarity too. Food that is taxed is hot, prepared, and that can be eaten right there on site.
Right. Okay, thank you. I bet you do know that pretty well. But, Mr. Chairman, my point was that I don't know, I would have bet firearm sales are higher than the food that's sold, but I don't know that, and I'm on thin ice. But I was saying that you could really do some looking and determine sales of firearms and ammunition if you wanted to work this data, especially if you you looked at the aggregates before this bill went into effect and after this bill went into effect. I don't know that that matters, but you would certainly be able to draw some conclusions about the amount of firearm sales and about that during different times if you were doing some statistical analysis. It'd be a lot easier if they weren't selling food too. It'd be pretty simple, but, right, Mr. Fanning, is that kind of correct?
Mr. Chairman, Senator Case, yes, absolutely. And that would be correct. And we try to do that analysis in other areas. A lot of big talk is on food exemption or other exemptions, but at the end of the day, it is still aggregated data. So there's not going to be personally identifiable unless there was only one gun sale for a sporting goods store in a year. It's all aggregated data. And when I get requests for exemptions, repeal, or impositions, all aggregated data.
And Mr. Chairman, I guess I want to ask somebody else, or we can discuss in the committee, why wouldn't we, for example, bear spray, kind of an essential product, make you have it, why don't we exempt that? Why don't, you know, there's just probably a lot of things we could exempt. I'm out of line here. I think I should wait till general discussion. Okay.
Okay. What's your pleasure? Move it. Second. Been moved by Senator Ide, seconded by Senator French. Any discussion?
Mr. Chairman, I would speak against the bill just in the sense that we don't have we're not anti-firearms. We're just trying to collect sales taxes from sales to fund what sales taxes fund. The state does receive sales tax revenues. It's important source of revenue. We're lucky. I thought sales tax was going away. 10 years ago, I would say the future of sales tax is not bright. But with the ability to collect on online sales and kind of the robustness of that, and the fact that big retailers at the national level that do online sales are being very responsible in paying their taxes, there's a really bright future for sales taxes to fund our government. For example, it's used, if you look at counties get 12 mills, but they get relatively less of the sales tax. Cities get 8 mills, so they get a little bit more of the sales tax. State gets sales tax. It's an important source of revenue. We charge sales tax on all sorts of things that we would consider essential. Clothing, support hose, you just name it. If it's not medical, and that's medical like prescription, or it's not food, we try to collect sales tax on it. But the truth is, Wyoming has a lot of exemptions in the sales tax area. South Dakota, for example, I'm doing this by memory, but they have similar sales tax rates to us, but they have a lot fewer exemptions. And so their sales tax collections are much, much more powerful, which is important if you want to get rid of property taxes, and we don't like property taxes, and we think they're terrible taxes, and you like consumption taxes. Here we are with the most sales tax exemptions of most states. We've got to collect taxes to fund our governments and what we do. I hope we'll resist this bill, despite the fact that it's on firearms. Which it's not differential. We're not punishing firearms any more than we are support hose.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Question for the DOR. Is there any way you can speculate on the revenue from firearms and ammunition? It's impossible. Yeah.
If I may, it's not impossible. In 2013, this bill was introduced, and there was a fiscal note in the 2013 version. The Department of Revenue estimated that there was approximately, in that year, this is a decade ago given, $9 million worth of sales in firearms in the state of Wyoming. And so they assigned, the 5 and whatever percentage it was at the time, taxation to it. And they came up with, it was 5.38% based on just over 9 million sold. And they came out with $487,000 per year. And that, obviously that's divided between your general fund and your local governments. So local governments would have seen a hit of $235,000. And the general fund would have received a hit of $257,000. So I don't know how ammunition and firearm sales today compared to 10 years ago, but it seems like a pretty minimal amount, honestly, that we collect off of it. It's not like, I don't think anyone's gonna go belly up off of a few $100,000. So,
Thank you for that.
yeah.
I think we need to tie this up and call for the question.
Sure.
You call the roll, please?
This is a roll call vote on Senate File 58, elimination of sales tax on firearms. Senator Case,
No.
Senator French,
Yes.
Senator Ide,
Aye.
Senator Pappas.
Aye.
Chairman McEwen.
Aye.
We have 4 aye and 1 no, Mr. Chairman.